They didn't understand your silence, and so they filled it with their own noise, assumptions, insults, laughter. They saw you quiet and thought you had nothing to say. They watched you still and thought you had nowhere to go. But the truth, you weren't lost. You were listening to yourself, to the weight of your own thoughts, to the ache in your bones that told you something had to change, to the quiet war inside you that no one else could hear. They mocked that. People fear what they don't understand, and nothing terrifies shallow minds more than someone who chooses silence over attention, stillness over noise, healing over performance. They thought you were frozen, but you were only pausing long enough to shed what wasn't meant to come. With you, you weren't idle. You were digging underneath the surface, where the truth was buried beneath years of noise, shame, and pretending to be okay. You were rebuilding from the inside out. While they laughed, you were bleeding, stitching wounds they'd never even noticed. While they bragged, you were breaking in all the right places so something stronger could grow. That silence, it was sacred. It was where the mask slipped off and the real you stepped forward. Not the version they applauded. It's not the one you curated just to feel accepted, but the raw, stripped-down version of you that didn't need permission to exist. You didn't post about it, didn't explain it, didn't try to make them understand, because some chapters aren't meant to be seen. They're meant to be survived. You went missing from the noise and found yourself in the quiet. And somewhere in that empty space, the one they judged, pitied, and ridiculed, you were sharpening, bit by bit, not for revenge, not for applause, but because something inside you finally said, "This isn't who I'm staying." You stopped needing to be heard, started needing to be whole, and now they look confused because you're not who you were. You walk differently now, not louder, but heavier. Grounded, your presence is quieter, but it echoes deeper. They don't know what to do with that, because the person they thought they could mock into disappearing has become the person they can't ignore. They used to call your silence weakness. Now they copy your restraint. They study your focus. They try to emulate your calm, but they'll never understand what it cost you, because you didn't build this version of yourself in the spotlight. You built it in the dark, in the silence, where no one was clapping, where no one believed, where it was just you choosing to rise anyway. And that kind of silence is sacred, because it gave birth to the version of you they never saw coming. There's a moment you don't forget, when they laughed, not playfully, not out of misunderstanding, but cruelly, as if your effort was a punchline, as if you're trying, you're stumbling, learning, starting again, was something to be ashamed of. You stood there maybe with your voice shaking, your ideas half-formed, your hands unsure, and instead of meeting you with respect or even silence, they smirked, they pointed, they passed judgment like they were better, louder, smoother, more certain. But here's what you didn't see in that moment: they weren't laughing at you. They were laughing at what you represented. It's because your willingness to try, to stand alone, to be seen, it exposed something in them, something hollow, something scared. Mockery is never about you. It's a mirror, a twisted reflection of the things they haven't dealt with, the dreams they gave up on, the risks they never took, the fears they've disguised as cynicism. You weren't the punchline, you were the trigger, and their laughter, it was a defense mechanism, because if they could reduce you to a joke, they wouldn't have to face the part of themselves that felt small standing next to your courage. You didn't fail, you simply made them uncomfortable, because you were doing something real, something vulnerable. And that kind of truth shakes people who've spent their lives pretending. They wanted to shrink you because you reminded them of who they could have been. If they weren't so afraid, and yeah, maybe it hurt, because you're human, you wanted someone to say, "I see what you're trying to do," not tear it down, not turn it into entertainment. But pain like that is also clarity. The ones who mock are rarely the ones who matter. They don't build, they don't risk. They sit on the sidelines and commentate while you bleed, evolve, and grow. And at some point, you stop letting their noise define your worth. You stop asking small minds to understand your path, because you realize their mockery was never about your direction. It was about their paralysis. And now, they watch, still laughing sometimes, still pretending it's not envy, not fear, not regret. But you know better now. You've stopped measuring yourself by their reactions, because you finally understand. Their laughter was just a reflection of who they are, and of who you refuse to be. They didn't take you seriously. You remember that feeling, don't you? When you spoke, and they looked through you, like your voice didn't matter, like your presence was forgettable, like your ideas were too strange, too raw, too different to be worth anything. They didn't say it outright, but the silence was clear. The nods that never came. The eyes that glazed over the moment you began. You felt it in your gut, that slow, sinking awareness that they had already made up their minds about you. And so, for a while, you questioned yourself. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not meant for this. Maybe I should quiet down, blend in, disappear. But something inside you refused. Because rejection for people like you doesn't mean stop, it just means not yet. Kept going, quietly, consistently, not to prove them wrong, not at first. You did it because you needed to know what would happen if you didn't give up on yourself. And then something shifted. The same ones who looked through you started looking at you curiously, then constantly, then obsessively. They started asking questions, repeating your words, borrowing your tone, adopting the same moves they once dismissed. You became the blueprint. For people who once acted like you weren't even worth noticing. That's the strange part about rejection. It has a short memory when success walks into the room, so they forget. They ever ignored you. Forget the smirks, the subtle dismissals. They start acting like they saw your potential all along, but you remember, because obsession always follows rejection. That's just how people work. What they once couldn't understand, they now want to imitate. Because standing next to you now doesn't feel uncomfortable. It feels beneficial. They want proximity to your growth without admitting they rejected. It's roots, and that part hurts, doesn't it? Because some of them don't admire you. They want to wear your skin without carrying your story. They want the shine, not the scars. But you've learned something they haven't. You learned how to move without applause, how to evolve in silence, how to grow when no one believed you could. And now that they've turned their gaze toward you, don't look back for validation. You're not who you were when they dismissed you. They're not who they pretend to be now that you're visible. This isn't revenge, it's reality. You were rejected not because you lacked value, but because you carried something they didn't recognize, yet now they do. Not with respect, with need. Because the moment they realized they couldn't be you, they settled for mimicking you. That's not your burden to carry. It's your proof you were never forgettable. You were just ahead of them. They were loud, always loud. Always laughing, always posting, always moving in circles that looked like progress but led nowhere. They filled the room with their noise and called it confidence. On the other hand, stayed quiet. Not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much. You saw something deeper. You weren't interested in temporary applause. You weren't chasing the moment. You were preparing for something far beyond the moment, but no one claps for preparation. No one notices the nights you stayed in while they went out. No one sees the mornings you woke up early, just to fail in private again and again, until something finally worked. They don't see the conversations you had with yourself, the kind where you questioned everything but still showed up anyway. They just see the silence, and they misread it. They think if you're not visible, you're not doing anything. But you were doing everything. You were building, piece by painful piece. While they chased attention, you chased mastery. While they sought validation, you sought clarity. You weren't avoiding life, you were constructing one. And yes, it was lonely. It was slow. There were moments you watched them laugh together and wondered if you were missing out. You wondered if your quiet effort would ever amount to something they'd understand. But deep down, you knew. You weren't planting for the season. You were planting for the storm, for the long haul, for the version of you that wouldn't break when everything else eventually did. Because distraction always breaks. Trends fade. Crowds scatter. But the ones who build in silence, they become the foundation others rely on when the ground finally shakes. And now, the shift has begun. They see you, not the old you, the one they overlooked. They see the version that came out of the quiet, steady, unseen work, and they're curious. Suddenly, they want to know what you were doing all that time. Suddenly, your silence doesn't feel so empty. It feels powerful. But don't be fooled. They weren't blind. They were watching. You just didn't think you'd outlast them. They didn't think your quiet grind would make more noise than their spotlight. They didn't expect the person who stayed in the background to become the standard, but you did, because you were never waiting for their permission. You were laying bricks while they threw confetti. And now you've built something they can't. Ignore a self, a life, a purpose, too real to fake, too strong to shake. And the best part? They don't even realize they taught you what not to become. While they partied, you prepared. While they watched, you built. They didn't just leave you. They dismantled everything you thought was real. They looked you in the eyes and made promises they never meant to keep. And when it all came crashing down, they didn't flinch. They walked away like you were nothing. Like what they did wouldn't leave a scar so deep it'd change the way you breathe. And it did. You stopped being soft. You stopped explaining. You stopped needing their approval to feel alive. Because betrayal doesn't just break you, reveals you. You learned more from that silence than any conversation you ever had. You started hearing things differently, seeing things more clearly. When they left, the noise went with them. And in the quiet, something new began to take shape. You stopped asking, why me? You started asking, what now? And that was the moment the blueprint began. It wasn't rage that built you. It wasn't revenge. It was the decision to no longer be the version of yourself that let them sit at your table. While they sharpened their knives, you started rebuilding without applause. No spotlight, no support. Just the sound of your own breath in the cold. Stacking one brick of discipline on top of another. Designing a version of yourself that didn't beg to be understood anymore. You realized the betrayal wasn't your ending. It was your draft. Because if they hadn't walked out, you wouldn't have built this level of silence, this level of focus, this kind of detachment that no longer needs validation to keep moving forward. They didn't just betray you. They handed you the tools. Every scar became measurement. Every mistake, a new foundation. They thought they ended you. But all they did was clear the site. And look at you now, not bitter, not broken, but rebuilt. Heavier, colder, stronger. More calculated than ever. You no longer hope they see what they lost. You no longer speak their names in anger, because you understand now. They were never part of the final design. You were never meant to stay soft. You were never meant to stay small. The moment they left, they gifted you the one thing you never would have given yourself permission to become dangerous. So no, betrayal wasn't your downfall. It was your blueprint. The original sketch of a version of you that can't be manipulated, underestimated, or unmade. And when they see who you are now, they won't recognize what they walked away from, because that person no longer exists. You redesigned. And this time, you built it in silence. So nothing and no one can break it again. They didn't leave you because you changed. Left because your change made them uncomfortable. You started doing what they couldn't. You started growing. No one talks about it, but growth, real growth, is loud. Even when it's silent. It shakes things. It exposes things. Threatens things. You didn't become colder. You just stopped explaining your dreams to people who never had the courage to chase their own. You didn't become distant. You just built distance between yourself and the chaos you were once willing to live inside. At first they laughed. They rolled their eyes when you said you needed space. They said you were different now. Like it was a flaw. Like it was betrayal. But the truth is, you weren't betraying them. You were betraying the version of you that settled just to belong. And they were loyal to that version. Not to you, but to the version of you who didn't make them question their own limits. You started healing. You started showing up for yourself. You started caring about what you thought instead of bending to please them. And the minute you chose yourself, they called it selfish. They weren't used to you having a voice that didn't echo theirs. They weren't ready for the silence when you stopped asking for their validation. They weren't prepared to look in the mirror your growth became. That's what your evolution really is. It's a mirror. And not everyone wants to look into it, people. Don't mind when you struggle as long as you stay predictable. They'll stay close while you're broken, because your brokenness doesn't challenge their own stagnation. But start rising. Start rebuilding yourself. That's when they flinch. That's when the excuses start. That's when you become much too focused, too distant, but deep down, you know the truth. You outgrew the story they were still stuck in. And they weren't ready to flip the page. Growth makes people nervous because it forces them to feel. It holds up a light in rooms they've kept dark for years. And when you start walking toward that light, you'll notice some people slowly back away. Let them call you changed. Let them call you cold. Let them misunderstand you. It's not your job to shrink just to fit back into the version of you they remember. You didn't come this far just to turn around and convince the crowd that your path is valid. You know it is, because you felt every mile of it in your bones. Let them watch from a distance. Let your evolution make them uncomfortable, because if your growth doesn't shake something, it's not real growth. You didn't change for them. You changed because staying the same was killing you. If becoming more of yourself makes the room go quiet, maybe you finally found your real voice, and it doesn't need to be understood, it just needs to be true. You thought the no meant you weren't enough, that something was wrong with you, that maybe you didn't try hard enough, or worse, maybe you were never meant for it at all. That moment, the silence after rejection, it cuts deeper than most wounds. Because it's not just about what you didn't get, it's about what it made you question about yourself. You started second-guessing everything, your path, your pace, your purpose. You looked around and saw doors opening for people who barely even knocked, while every door you approached slammed hard in your face again and again. And in that space between trying and being denied, you got angry. Quietly, you didn't show it, but you felt it. Deep in your chest. Why them? Not you? Why not this time? But let me say something you need to hear, and I mean really hear. Every no was not a punishment. It was a pivot. It wasn't the world shutting you out. It was life forcing you to move, because you were getting too attached to places you were never meant to settle in. You begged for certainty. But sometimes, the only answer the universe gives you is rejection. Not to break you, but to redirect you. Because if it had said yes too soon, you would have stayed stuck in something too small for the version of you that's still being built. You see, when life tells you no, it's not always saying stop. Sometimes it's saying, not here, not now, not like this. That opportunity you thought you needed, that person you thought would never leave, that version of success. You clung to with both hands, all of it, a temporary chapter, not the whole book. You weren't being denied your destiny. You were being protected from distractions. And that anger, that ache in your chest, that wasn't just pain, that was direction. That was life, pushing you, pulling you, correcting your course in silence. You didn't fail. You listened. Kept moving forward even when the doors didn't open, even when no one clapped, even when the silence after the no felt louder than any applause ever could. That takes strength most people will never understand. But you do now, don't you? You can look back and see it clearly. Those no's were never against you. They were the trail markers, the signs, the fingerprints of a future bigger than what you were aiming for. So no, you're not lost. You're aligned. You didn't take the wrong road. You just had to learn that rejection isn't the opposite of progress. It's a test of direction. And every time you listen to that quiet voice inside instead of the noise outside, you passed. So if you're still getting no's, don't panic. You're still being guided where you're headed. It's not just a destination. It's where your yes was always waiting. They laughed, didn't they? At your ideas, at your dreams, at the way you saw the world, different, raw, ambitious. They didn't understand you, so they made you the punchline. But the truth is, they laughed because it was easier than trying to see you. Because if they looked too closely, they might have had to confront the fact that they gave up on the very same dreams you're still chasing, so they mocked you. Quietly, loudly, with smirks in private rooms and side eyes in public places, and for a while, it stung. Not because their words mattered, but because some part of you wanted to be seen. Some part of you, still tender from past wounds, wondered if they were right, if maybe you're a joke. But here's what they never tell you about being mocked. It only echoes for a moment, and then silence. 'Cause jokes fade, but legacy lingers. They forgot what they laughed at last week, but you. You're building something they'll never forget. Every late night, every small win no one clapped for. Every silent morning where you showed up despite the doubt, you weren't seeking attention. You were laying bricks, invisible to them, but heavy in value. You're crafting something they couldn't touch, your impact. And while they were busy talking, you were becoming. You were learning how to stand without applause, how to believe without backup, how to grow without validation. You became the kind of person who doesn't need to announce what's coming, because the work speaks when you don't have to. And now, look, they still talk. But now the tone shifted. Now it's curiosity. Eyes envy, disguised as advice. Now they don't laugh at you, they study you. They follow you. They mimic the very things they once mocked. And maybe part of you wants revenge. Maybe part of you wants to throw it all back in their face, to show them you were right. But here's the twist. You don't need to, because the highest form of revenge is becoming untouchable, not in ego, but in discipline and growth. And focus. Your legacy isn't something they can cancel or erase, because it was never built in front of them, it was built within you. And no joke, no rumor, no cheap shot can outlive the truth of what you've built. So let them laugh, let them whisper, let them say you're too much, too intense, too focused, because one day they'll realize, hey, their noise was temporary. But your life? That became the echo. A story they can't stop hearing. Standard they can't stop measuring themselves against. Reminder that while they were busy being entertained, you were busy building something that would outlive you. They used to laugh not just at your dreams, at you, how you talked, how you dressed, how you thought. Everything about you was something they mocked. Your ambition is too big. Your silence, too weird. Your ideas, too unrealistic. They didn't see potential in you. They saw a target. And in those moments, it wasn't just words that hurt. It was the feeling of being outnumbered, misunderstood, and invisible in a room full of loud opinions. You tried fitting in, tried softening the edges, tried being normal. It never worked, because deep down you weren't made to follow. And they knew it before you did. And that's what made you dangerous. You kept going quietly. You started choosing silence over explanations, work over arguments, and discipline over validation. They still laughed. But you didn't flinch this time, because something was shifting. Inside you, there was a storm building, one that didn't need attention, only time and time. Started doing something funny. The same people who mocked your routine started copying your habits. It's the ones who rolled their eyes at your discipline started asking for advice. The same voices that once called you delusional started quoting your words. They didn't admit it, of course. They never do. But you started noticing your name came up in rooms you weren't in. Your mindset became the blueprint. Your way became the way, and it hit you. They weren't laughing anymore. They were following. Not because you chased approval, but because you outlasted their doubt. They didn't change their minds. You changed their reference point. You became the standard, the one they measure themselves against now, the one they try to imitate, the one they said would fail but had the discipline to rise anyway. And that's the moment the pain becomes power. It's not because you need their praise, but because now you see the full picture. Their mockery was never about you. It was about what you represented. You reminded them of what they could be. If they weren't scared, you represented truth in a world built on shortcuts and noise. And truth always threatens comfort. That's why they tried to erase you. That's why they tried to laugh you into silence. But you stayed the course. You built through storms. Focused while they distracted themselves. You grew while they gossiped. You became what they couldn't predict, and now they look to you for guidance, for answers, for permission. But you don't need their permission anymore. You never did, because you are no longer trying to prove yourself. You're the proof, the standard The storm they tried to outrun and the silence they hear now isn't fear, it's respect.